All right, welcome. This is Justin Owings, and today we have here David Mannheim. And we're really excited to have everyone with us today because we have some great material to share with you. One of the most common things that we hear for our users at FullStory is that when they open up FullStory and for the first time or maybe any time, they're presented with so much information. You have hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of sessions just waiting to be researched and watched. Where do you even begin? And that question is a hard one to answer, and you need a structure or methodology to approach it. And more, when you step back and think about what the objective is with a tool like FullStory, you're trying to obviously improve your web experience, and that often means improving or optimizing conversions. So today we have a guest with us, David Mannheim. He's from the UK, and he has a team of about 20 people who work on conversion rate optimization for their clients. And they have developed a methodology to use FullStory as a tool to mine it for mine sessions, filter it down to kind of the things that will help them tease out insights that can lead to either direct improvements on a website just out of the box, or can lead to experiments or running hypotheses for things that they can test and then iterate on to improve the websites for their clients. So we're really excited to have David here today, and I'm going to let him kick it off in just a second. If you're on this webinar, please know that we will have follow-up materials for you in the coming days. So everything that David shares here today, he's been gracious enough to allow us to pass on to everyone in attendance. Also, feel free to tweet about this webinar if you want to let anybody know that we are doing this live right now. Please join. And if you have questions, please ask away. If you can see in the bottom left, there's a button to ask a question. Feel free to pose any questions you might have now or as the webinar goes through. I'll be keeping an eye on those things, and I can chime in with David and ask questions on the fly. And at the end, as time allows, we'll also have some follow-up questions then. Finally, please notice there's a little button that says get a free month of FullStory. And if you want to give FullStory a trial and you have not used it yet, please check that out. And again, if you have questions, please ask away and we'll get this going. So without further ado, I'm bringing you David Mannheim from User Conversion.
Thank you very much. Hey guys. So hopefully you can all see my screen. I don't know if it's the main screen. There we go. It's the main screen now. Thank you for that. So yeah, technology is a wonderful thing. So we are here to talk about session replay, screen recording for conversion optimization purposes. We use FullStory day in, day out, but we're not here to evangelize FullStory. We are just here to say, look, this is how we do it. We recognize it's really hard. So we're going to go through these things. We're going to talk about us. I'm really sorry, just to say hello. We'll talk about why screen recording analysis is so hard. And then we're going to go through a systematic input and a systematic output. And we're going to apply all that in a live experiment breakdown. So we run a lot of experiments. I think we run nearly 600 per year. 60 per month, or thereabouts. So what I want to do is we have a live experiment that's doing really well. It's been going for about 60 days, and I want to show you guys how we analyze experiments and how we created that experiment all through using session recording software, specifically FullStory. I guess the boring bit, this is us. We're a happy bunch, as you can see, especially that fellow in the middle. I am the slightly overweight one, just to the right of him in black, smiling. And we have been going for about 2 or 3 years. We're in Manchester in the UK, and we are all big Manchester United fans, and it's deadline day over here, so it's very tense. I guess a little bit about the way we work. We work in what's known as T-shaped optimization. So we have, I think, about 18 to 20 specialisms and individuals that have a very focused specialism within conversion optimization. In this case, it would be web analytics, for example. But the key point is that everyone has a foundational understanding of what conversion optimization is. And these specialists, they come together, we create hypotheses and thus do a lot of A/B testing to prove those hypotheses. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute. But this is our, I guess, very top level framework. We call it a COE model. It's only because it's an acronym. So we have configuration, opportunities, insights, and experiment. I've noticed that the chat is still disabled. If you do want to ask a question, once that does get enabled, feel free to do so, especially if I'm talking too quickly. But you can see there, this is just like a very top level understanding of how we generate experiments and there we go, and create a conversion optimization and conversion uplift. Specifically, we use session recording software in 3 out of those 4 core areas. So we use session recordings to take a look at what opportunities exist. We use session recordings to generate insights, and we use session recordings to analyze experiments. I'm going to go through each one of those in detail now. So opportunities, you might not be able to see that, but when we're creating and reviewing session recording playbacks, as the guys mentioned, you're greeted with like tens of thousands of session recordings, and you're like, where do I start? We'll go through that in a bit, but these are opportunities, or I guess you could call them observations. We have noticed X on this device, on this template, with this level of priority. This is an observation that we've noticed a single user doing. Let's go to the next user. Let's see if he does the same, or she, and try and replicate that. So we're creating a bank of observations, of opportunities, and prioritizing them accordingly. What we're then able to do is almost squish all those observations together and code them up. So we give them each an individual code. And again, fear not, we will go through this in a bit. And we're able to say, okay, as you can see here, like, what was that? 45% of issues or observations were found on desktop. Or as you can see over here, a lot of the issues, like 12% of them, were found at the checkout level, and so on and so forth. And by using this coding methodology, we're able to say, okay, here are all the observations, here are the insights. Let's now move to an experiment standard. So we can experiment with these insights. A lot of people tend to think that when you experiment from an idea. And that's not really the case. You actually experiment from a user problem, from a piece of insight. So when you prioritize, you don't really prioritize experiments, you prioritize insights. Probably another talk for another day. But here's an example of when we do experiment, how we pull that into FullStory. You probably can't see, we can share this code later, but it just gives the experiment and the variation a string each, and then it pushes it into FullStory. Now, you can do this, but what's really interesting is you don't need to do it. If you namespace your CSS correctly and uniquely, then you can just use the FullStory kind of omnisearch to say, okay, users who clicked on unique namespace, unique CSS selector here, and then it will just go and grab all the users who utilize that function. So I'll give you an example. I don't suppose you can see here, but this experiment is called WB036. WB stands for the client, 036 is the ID. So WB036, and we take that ID and we give each of our CSS selectors that ID in front of it, which then namespaces it. So that means anybody who interacts with that CSS selector, we can just pop that in OmniSearch and away we go. And what does that mean? I did forget to mention I'm a huge Disney fan. It's kind of the full circle. We're using session recording analysis to identify opportunities, to create and manage insights, and to analyze our experiments. It really is, pardon the pun, the circle of life. What's really interesting though is how to structure what we call input. And by input, I mean you get those hundreds of thousands of different session recordings. It's pretty overwhelming, right? And you're like, where do I begin? And it's really hard. Another Disney slide. It's really, really hard. Again, another Disney slide. But let's think about why. So you're greeted with this, right? So you can see there's 49,000 people. Where the bloody hell do you begin? And it's hard for two reasons. The first is quantity. Obviously, 49,000 sessions. The sheer amount of session recordings makes it difficult to analyze because you do ask yourself, where do you begin? And the second point is that of subjectivity. So session recording analysis is really difficult to analyze because it's so subjective. I guarantee if you gave one screen recording, kind of session recording to 5 different people, you'll get 5 different interpretations of what that user is doing. So it's so incredibly subjective. And what we do in conversion optimization, or as marketeers, is that we try and remove subjectivity out of it. And we try and add objectivity into it because we're data-driven geeks at the end of the day. So we're going to talk about both of those. So let's address quantity. So we need a systematic input. We need a way, you've got all these session recordings in this black box. How do you shake it up and say, here you go. Here's an organizational, systematic methodology or structure to take all those 49,000 screen recordings, which you don't need to see them all, and have a nice hierarchy to them. So this is what we found from analyzing thousands of screen recordings. The top tip that we have is that of focus. You can do general screen recordings, but from experience, the more focused you are, the better the outcome, or the more precise your insight or observation becomes. Let me give you an example. It's much easier to take a look at, say, users on a checkout than users as a whole and how then they interact with the checkout. So try and be more focused, try and be more specific. The image of Ratatouille on the left has nothing to do with this slide, but the image on the right, you probably can't see because we go for a nice design chic, is giving our analysis an objective. And it says here, see if I can read it, understand how users use the brand section of the website by focusing on how users reach it and what they're using this section for. So by appending an objective to each of your tasks, as they were, so your session recording analysis, you are more easy, it's easier to kind of generate some kind of output. So tip number one, focus.
So David, what you're describing is a combination of having, basically using search and FullStory to narrow down results, but then also having some kind of purpose behind it. So what is the goal that you're trying to accomplish, and then how can I cater my results, my sessions, and whittle them down to the things that matter the most?
Yeah, well, it's like anything. If you were to give a designer a brief and you just said, I want it to look sexy, it's not going to be as good as giving the designer the brief of the users, do this and they need to do X, Y, and Z. So the more focused you are with your objective, the more focused you'll be with your insight. So just by appending a small objective to every piece of your analysis, we find it tends to work wonders. We think there are kind of 3 different types of session recordings. There's the strategic, the tactical, and the habitual. Strategic is general user behavior. What are users doing? What, how are they interacting with a multitude of elements? Tactical is more specific user behavior. Those users that change the delivery field, for example, or those users that interact with filters. They're very specific tasks that users are doing. And then there's habitual. Habitual is continuous user behavior. Don't think of users as like, oh, I'm coming onto the site and then I'm going to leave. They come on, more often than not, more than one instance. And that's what obviously FullStory does. It kind of ties sessions together to create a user, which is obviously the way GA is going, which is, I guess, the holy grail of identifying what users are doing as a whole. This is more habitual. We should be looking at session recordings almost every single week to identify patterns and user behavior analysis and so on and so forth. And you're probably asking, how do I do this? Well, we kind of use this diagram to help us out. So when we're talking about being more specific, let's think about going from the general to the more personalized, to the more specific. So at the top, you've got templates and user flows, right? You've got, I want to find people who, a template, who are on the product page, or a user flow is, I want to find people who move between basket and checkout. These are quite general pieces of behavior, they're quite big. And then we move into devices. So we could be like, okay, I want to find out users who are on mobile, but who are on the product page, or users who are on tablet, but use between basket and checkout. You see, we're getting more and more specific as we go down. We could go to browsers, and then acquisition source, and even mini journeys and click events, and yada, yada, yada. From there, you can see this is top tip number 4. Top tip number 4 is just to try and categorize those screen recordings. I'm going to give you guys some time to take this in because it's quite, I guess, complex. But if you break down the objective of what you're trying to do into one of these 4 categories, again, we find it really helps. So take apprehension. So apprehension, it signifies kind of trust and reassurance. So why shouldn't users complete a test? Take a, product page, add to basket. We want to find out the anxiety of why users are not completing a task. In this case, adding their item to basket. So we can do that through screen recordings. And I'm going to move on to the next slide, but you can definitely have this. An example of this might be as such. This is a usable example. So when we talk about usable, we talk about accessibility, clarity, performance, etc. The error clicks, the rage clicks, the dead clicks, the thrash cursors, and those types of things that signify usability issues are great. Just start off with all of those. That's what we do with every single client. Being completely candid, client will come in, part of our onboarding process, go through a shed load of error clicks as per that process, a shed load of dead clicks and rage clicks, and we give it to the client and say, there you go, fix all this, job done. It's not quite job done, but hopefully you understand the process. So usable screen recordings, you can categorize into these elements. An example might be this. So we found with this client that there were a lot of thrash cursors around the product image. And that's because after validating it with some remote user testing sessions, the zoom image that appears next to the main image is so small that users, to look at the minutiae of detail, were looking specifically at the image. So they were going, I can't find it. So yeah, it's an example of a usability issue. Or this might be an example of a value issue. So if I just go back up for you, you can see, this is useful. This is about value and relevance. Do users actually want to complete the test? So let's go down here. So we found that nobody was clicking on data sheets, but a lot of users were clicking on technical specification, demonstrating some kind of intent. And then going back to overview. This is value to the user. This is what they wanted to see. So I'm going to give you a live example. So all that stuff is great. It's very theoretical. Some will classify it as boring. But this is the example. This is the juicy stuff that we care about.
And David, the last example you gave, that was from click maps within FullStory. If anybody hasn't used that feature, the click maps will show aggregated clicks on a given page. So if you haven't seen that or you haven't used that, you'll just want to go over to Page Insights and FullStory in case you haven't seen that part of FullStory. Sorry, keep going, Dave.
Oh, it's fine. So here's an example. So we're going to show you this output in a minute, but we took a look through FullStory for one of our clients, a client called Travis Perkins. They've given me permission to use this. And we found various different observations. So with this, the user struggled to redefine timber with the dimensions it was given. Guys, I'm going to be honest, I haven't clicked on this, so I don't even know whether it'll work, let alone what will happen, but hopefully it will give us a good understanding. So what did it say? Users struggle to refine. So the user's clicking on more lengths, they're going back, they're clicking on 6 meters squared, that was already there. What else are we doing? Are we doing anything else? They're then clicking on length. So yeah, you can kind of associate that. Anyway, oh, they do more. They're clicking on 6 meters squared to get rid of it. But don't you find that odd? They just use that. So I can understand why the analyst of this output said that the user struggled to redefine timber dimensions. They gave it a low priority. But what's really interesting is this. This is what I want to show you. Let's see if I can move this. So here, the user is struggling to navigate and categorize products. So let's go and take a look at this. So this example, the analyst mentioned that the user is struggling to categorize and navigate products. A very good analyst, I know that he's listening. So the users within the navigation, they go to building materials, they scroll over, they're not done with that, they go to doors and joinery. And you can almost say this out loud. You're like, what are you looking for? Okay, solid wood flooring, seems simple enough. See what he does, or she. Scrolling down. See there, the user's kind of almost trying to underline solid wood flooring. They're hovering over that. It kind of maybe suggests some level of intent to see what's going on. I always recommend, by the way, when you're reviewing these, to do it at 1 times speed. Like the option to 4 times speed is great, but you miss the minutiae of detail, and that's what really matters. So the user's looking at product, timber, and then I am pointing. Product and timber, back to solid wood flooring. Nothing's going on. Okay, and then they're back to the nav, or they're back to the search. I sound surprised, I've seen this before. So this is T7G timber. Never heard of it. We're going to change it. Okay, they change it to T&G timber. I think one of the core points here is that the user, was struggling to find this element. Now, I know it was one example, it's a sample of one, but from our analysis, we identified this numerous times in multiple different observations. We verified it with Google Analytics. We verified it with some moderated user testing as well. And as a whole, we actually came up with a hypothesis. This hypothesis was, we believe that providing an index navigation, users will succinctly get through to their desired product. In this case, essentially, it's giving users an A to Z listing of their thing, their navigation. The results were great. You can see here, conversion rate uplift of users who use the navigation, please note. 40% of users use the A to Z listing, 95% starts it. So you can see an example of it here. So the old nav you saw within the screen recording there had all the categories along. The new nav had this, so you could open the menu and it had this going on, which is very nice. But more importantly, we cared about this. We cared about, do users want to use the A to Z listing? And what we found is that 40% of users who utilize the nav actually use the A to Z listing, which is great.
So what was happening, the hypothesis is that before, that with only the menu, the limited categorization of, in this case, solid wood flooring, that they just couldn't quite figure out, or they thought maybe that category had timber, but yet it didn't. And then they struggled to understand, where do I go? And then you guys vetted that theory out that maybe if we had a alphabetical listing of all the products, that might capture what they were actually looking for better. And that,
exactly. You tell me, if you want to find timber, where would you go? I know that you would probably go to timber. You're in the industry. We'll let you off. But timber's building materials. It's within landscaping. This user actually went to Doors and Joinery, I believe. I'm not a timber expert. I must admit, I do not know. But in this case, we used session recording software, FullStory, to to observe behavior. And this behavior was being observed, that users were struggling to use the nav in plain terms. And we validated that. We created this hypothesis. We saw those results.
And that was a 26% uptick in conversions.
Yeah, that's of users who use the navigation. So we're comparing control and control.
Makes sense.
What we all need to remember here is that when we're doing an A/B test, we compare apples and apples. So when we're analyzing this, we need to be looking at users who use the element, not just who see it. And there's a great example of that here. So let me get rid of FullStory. So that's a methodology of how to structure some kind of input. You've got 50,000 sessions sitting in front of you, and you're thinking, what the hell do I do? This is scary. So that addresses the quantity issue. Now let's address subjectivity. Let's address the output issue. We actually started with this. This is a while ago. We got a couple of uni grads with us, and they associated like a thematic analysis to session recording analysis and reporting. And you could see this here. This was done, it doesn't actually say, but we've got a whole host of kind of examples of how you should create or analyze session recordings. And it was using something called thematic analysis. And it was going very much into the depths of exactly what users are doing. And it was a massive fail. It was a massive fail. But what was really interesting is that the output was really good. It just took ages. So we needed the balance of really nice, qualitative, almost objective output versus speed. So we created this. And we've iterated on it ever since. Honestly, I find this fantastic. And I'm going to walk you through it now. I don't know whether I have any more slides. No. So, yeah, you saw a really old version here. I actually don't think this is that old. It's maybe version 1.5 or something. But here, you can see current version. Let's call it 2.1. So what this does is that it allows you to code and attribute specific session recording sessions. So what I mean by that is that you observe something within a session recording. Let's do a real one now. I don't know what account I'm in. I'm going to look at mobile. This is just me playing about. And look at that. B race grade. Nice. So we're going to look at this guy or girl. And we're going to see what's going on, just for the sake of argument. And I'm going to show you how we use our spreadsheet. So this user is adding for collection. It's a really bad example because look at that, there's an error. That's nice, isn't it? So the user is adding for collection, or at least they are trying to, and failing miserably. So what we do is that we get the link for the URL, and we go ahead and we pop it here. And we type in the observation that we have observed. So user, I'd probably say error within add for collection at PDP level. PDP, product detail page. Great. Those new observations get pulled into general observations, which you can select from at a later stage. It just stops, it kind of categorizes everything. We noticed this on mobile. The template was product. The action. What is the action from this? Every observation should have an action, right? Well, for me, this is a bug. So this just needs to be fixed. But we categorize them as further investigation, experiment idea, direct amend, or bug. This is definitely a bug. And priority is very subjective, but we go low, medium, or high. Now I'm going to give this a medium.
And David, just to be clear for everybody else on the call, this spreadsheet is something that you created, and then if you look into, say, the drop-downs tab on it, you set it up so that the different columns pull from a specific set of templates or for the device. You set all that stuff up so that when you track these insights, you have a nice way to categorize everything on the fly.
Exactly. So what we found is that we used a spreadsheet just to keep everything in check, Google Sheets, so we could share it. And then what we found is that if a client were to turn around to us and they would say, what's going on a mobile product page, then we were never able to show them that. We would just show them everything. So we added these columns in to be able to filter on those things. So now we can turn around to the client. I'm not very good with Excel, I must admit. Now we can turn around to the client and we can say, okay, here are all the mobile issues that we found on product page. It's just very nice and easy to filter, especially when you have loads. I mean, here there's not many, to be fair, 43. But you can kind of categorize everything and say, okay, I just want to see all of the desktop. Bang, there you go. So it's really useful. And don't get me wrong, we actually use the FullStory, what's it called, the notes. We just find that this is kind of a preferred way for us to kind of share it with everybody. Now, what the cool thing about this is that we pull it into what's known as a summary document. And you can see here that just everything's categorized. So you can see this issue here. So users distracted from checkout by discount code box. We observed that 3 times. It should, in theory, signify level of priority or hierarchy. This we observed twice. Users unaware that they have missing info missing on forms. That's really interesting. And then you can create nice, sexy graphs and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's how we kind of output everything. We do it using a Google Sheet. It's just nice to code and kind of give everything mini attributes and tags. So do you remember that experiment that I was speaking about, which was TP11? So we kind of feel like we're a dentist at times, where we're like, oh, TP11, RC45. So TP11, that's the A to Z nav, right? So what's really cool is that we don't just analyze experiments with our quantitative data, we do it qualitatively. So quantitative is great, and we go into a lot of depth over there with free analysis that do that specific job. But it's the qualitative stuff that's really cool. It's not just, did the test win? It's almost saying why it won. So I'm going to show you now, we're going to analyze this together. I very briefly analyzed it. So I hope that's okay. And hopefully you can see my screen. Okay, so we know it's TP11. So thanks to the fact that we pull everything in as an experiment, we can just go to experiment, type in something, TP011. There we have it. We know that it was a variation. So we are just on mobile at the moment, so we're going to get rid of that because the experiment was not on mobile. So we're going to go to variation. Now this test was using an A/B testing tool called Monotate. And the way Monotate work is that they give variations and controls of every individual, I guess, apples and apples scenario. So we're going to give it variation has substring 1. Now this is great. So what this should do is that this should show us, and we're going to get one in the past, this should show us all our session recordings for that experiment. A whopping 18,000 people. Let's get started. I hope you guys have a few hours to spare. Okay, that's great. So we can see that this user is indeed on the variation. You can see that A to Z listing, right? So that's cool. So I wonder what this user is going to do. Now, the issue that we're obviously finding, hopefully you can figure it out as well, is that the user has seen the nav. It doesn't mean that they've used the nav. So I actually just want to find out the number of users that have used the nav. Now we could do this in one or two ways. The first is that we can go to Page Insights. We can kind of look at the most clicked in this session. And we can see that the user hasn't actually clicked the A to Z listing at all. We could go to Inspect Node and we can say, that's interesting. Look at the number of users that have clicked this, 27 total, and we can add it to search. Alternatively, we can do it old school. which is nice. So we can inspect the elements on the page. So just Chrome, right-click, inspect. Use your selector tool. And you can see there that I've highlighted the A to Z element. We're just going to get the div class, which is TP11 nav. And what we could do with FullStory is that we could just add it into the OmniSearch, and it'll bring up a bunch of selectors. And we're just going to go with the top one. What this should show us now is the number of the users that have used our wonderful navigation. It gave a 26% uplift of users who use the navigation. And away we go. We can go ahead and analyze it. Now, this is the danger of doing something live. You never know what could happen. Luckily, FullStory is just a script, and it's just restricted to what the user's seeing on their specific session. So the user's gone to K. Fantastic. They want to find some kitchen ranges. We can see from the overall session that it doesn't look to be very well engaged with. The user's definitely doing something in the middle. So it doesn't particularly look like a great session to address. So we're just going to go ahead, go back, go on to the next one. Now this one has 20 events. It's taken over 4 minutes. So we can see that they're probably a bit more engaged. And if we wanted to, we could add that to the OmniSearch.
So David, when you kind of look for sessions to dive into and get insights out of, you tend to scan the bar at the bottom of the session and see, look for periods of idleness or lots of clicking, or what do you typically look for?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, what we're doing here is we can't look for every screen recording, so we're almost just going back to this screen over here and just scanning and just being like, let's get some examples. We're not doing a full analysis in this webinar, but what you'll find is the law of diminishing returns. So you could view 100 screen recordings, or you could view 200 screen recordings, and you'll probably get a law of diminishing returns somewhere about the middle, and the graph will obviously kind of peter off. There's no telltale sign as to when that'll peter off. It's just a gut feel of, okay, I've got a good understanding of what users are doing within this very specific element. And the beauty of it is that law of diminishing returns, you get that gut feel more when you're more focused with the objective. So because I'm just looking at users who use a very specific element, I'm going to get that law of diminishing returns quicker than if I was looking at all users who move between, say, category and product. I do realize I have not answered your question in the least, but hopefully that's maybe a nice way of understanding it. So let's continue with the analysis. So user's gone to W and then back to T. Fantastic. So they're obviously looking for something that they originally thought was in W. Where's he going to go? Or she? Timber again. That's interesting. Or at least, yeah, timber. Okay, so question. Why did the user go to W first? What is there in W? Is it wood? Maybe? So we could note that down as an observation. And this is obviously just completely anecdotal. This is us believing that maybe the user was looking for wood. Okay, let's take that observation. Let's note it down. Let's copy it across properly. There we go. So user looking for timber went to W. Assume wood. We noticed it on desktop. It was within the navigation, and it was for further investigation. Quite a low priority for now. So what we can do is we know what our CSS selector is because we already put it in, and we can just scan down this right hand side. Oh, so you can see there the user has used it again. So we can just skip to that bit now. Just say, okay, Mr. User or Mrs. What did you do? So they're back to the A to Z, they're back to T, and they're back to timber. That's interesting. So what that might suggest is not necessarily something to do with the, just pause there, not necessarily something to do with the navigation, but it might suggest that whatever the page the user was on beforehand it was easier for them to go back to timber. So let's go ahead and find that. So this is an observation outside of the navigation. And we've got to be careful here, because you go in this rabbit hole syndrome of, oh, that's interesting, I'm going to follow that. When really you just want to focus on the nav. But we're not going to turn it away. So this user, what are they doing before they clicked on timber? So you can see there, can you see that? That the user actually went to the top left of their page, suggesting that they hit the back button. So whenever you see that, I think those are really nice, like inferential, anecdotal stacks. So that when users kind of go this way, it's almost like they're going back. So they're pressing something outside of the browser bar, i.e. back or what have you. If they go this way, you tend to find that they open a new tab. Now that's really good for things like product page. So if a user's on the product page and their mouse goes over here and they stay here for a while without any activity, it kind of suggests that they're maybe checking the price. They're going to another competitor, opening a new tab, going to a competitor, checking the price. Really interesting stuff.
That's a really fascinating observation. Have you guys ever done anything as a result of seeing that kind of behavior?
Oh, totally. Loads of things. I don't know what I can show you of our clients, but a really good example, I admit we stole it from, we used it. These guys did it first, Currys. They're quite a big electrical outfit in England. And we found that users and pasting the product title, it's not going to do it, is it? They may have changed their site, who knows? It is still loading. They were copying and pasting the product title and then going over to the browser, doing what doing what I explained before and checking their price. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to show you. I know that these guys have it. These are an old client. I'm sure they'll be fine. And what we did is that when users were copying and pasting the price, we kind of gave them a little explanation as to why they shouldn't be doing that. Again, they're not going to have it. But it was a nice little pop-up that said, hey, why are you copying and pasting? We offer price guarantees and free next day delivery and so on and so forth. For the life of me, I can't show you an example that might have that. But we noticed that originally, way back in the day, from screen recording software where users were going over to the top right of the screen, copying and pasting the product title, showed that nice uplift from what I remember. But a good example. I've just kind of lost my link. So what we noticed from this person is that they couldn't find timber. We were looking then, weren't we? They went to the back button and they just wanted all timber. Now, what that might suggest is that the timber link within the breadcrumbs perhaps wasn't enough. But isn't this interesting, guys? So they're on the timber page. Where are they going to go here? Nice little JavaScript error if you see in the top right. So they're in the timber page. They go back to the home page and go back to the timber page. Very odd. It maybe suggests that that timber page didn't quite satisfy the user need. So remember, when you're analyzing session recordings, it's often the things that you don't see that are the most important thing. So yes, you can understand what the user's doing, but try and think about why they're doing what they're doing. It's the stuff that they don't do that is often the most interesting. So we'll go ahead and we'll analyze maybe one or two more sessions. Let's go for this guy because he's next in line. He's only got 8 events. Preston Daniel says PC World has it on the product page. Nice copy modal. Thank you very much. That's the one I was looking for. So this guy's going to T or girl. And again, just something worthy of note is that this survey, whoever created this, is in the way of the kind of AB, the A to Z listing. So that's really interesting. So we would note that down, and we would say survey in the way of A to Z listing navigation. If you spell it right, it was on desktop. It was the navigation. and it's therefore, I would class that as a probably a direct amend. Just some Z indexing would solve that. I'd be interested to see if the user actually moves the survey, which they don't. So they've gone to timber cladding. Let's see if they find what they want. Another JavaScript error. Wow. So you can find JavaScript errors by just taking a look at this. If there's a big JavaScript error, it will go red and it'll shake, which is really nice. They're called error clicks. You get like an error reporting within your dashboard. So let's see what this user's doing. Do they go on? And yeah, they don't use the nav anymore. So that's that session done. So the user has obviously found the area that they want. So let's do one more, guys. Let's see if we can get anything else. I would anticipate that this takes, to analyze an experiment, maybe an hour, because you'll get that law of diminishing returns. So again, they're going to T. I'm betting timber. Popular thing. Oh no, we're hovering over toilets. So that's interesting. Again, in itself, and this might be anecdotal or quite assumptive, but the user is just kind of scanning the list. Do we think that maybe the usability needs a bit of improvement? You know, are 5 columns too much? You know, if we kind of look at some eye tracking to go along with this, we might find a nice Z pattern. But here, it might just feel like too many columns. The text might be too small. Indeed, the text is in green. Black might be better. So usability or legibility, kind of basic accessibility, that might be something that's going on here. I will note it down as an observation, because I do believe that it's an observation. Again, that's quite subjective of me to say. However, I'm just going to put legibility just for the sake of argument. There might be something there. Direct amend, very low, if there was an option for that. There might be something there, but who knows? These are just observations, though. That's all we're doing. Where's this guy going to go? So they go to R. You know what's really great about this is that you can classify different things with different names. So timber decking, users actually go to D for decking, where really it's under T for timber decking. And you can just look at little screen recordings to kind of get your wording right.
David, when you and your team do these kinds of sessions with, running through for a client, how long does that process typically take? Like, can you just kind of describe a little bit how you go about diving in? Is it a couple of days, a few hours?
We try and time box it as much as possible. So you remember those objectives we said before. It really does depend on the objective itself. So the more focused the objective, the more you should be time boxing them. We would generally recommend about 2 hours for a slightly more time boxed scenario. You could get something in 10 minutes if you really wanted to, but for that balance of quality and quantity, we recommend about 2 hours for a more focused task. And as you move up the funnel or up the filter, that time gets extended because there's more sensory input, there's more variables to consider.
Gotcha. So that just brings it back to really having a specific objective in mind when you start the process.
Exactly. It works really well for us. So yeah, I think from our perspective, we'll kind of leave it there. I know that those links will be available, but you feel free to email me. It might be a slight delay. It's quite a busy week. But feel free to email me, go to our site. But if you've got any questions, please do ask. We have iterated on this process, I would say about between 10 and 15 times just to try and get it right. And we spent a lot of money in doing so and a lot of time. And honestly, quite generally, just because we do believe that session recordings are one of the best conversion research techniques out there. And if you ask the question why, I could give you a whole host of reasons, but the main one is that it's natural. It's natural user behavior that's not skewed by tasks or kind of have any bias in them. Yes, they're hard to analyze, but they're natural, they're organic, they're real. Whereas, you know, moderated user testing, remote user testing, a lot of research techniques have their drawbacks, just like this. But we believe, pros versus cons, this is one of the best ones. So I hope you enjoyed that.
That's super fascinating, David. You mentioned there were some integrations that you have with FullStory. What are the main integrations that your team uses?
Honestly, we just use, because we do so much A/B testing, we just use the A/B testing kind of integrations. So they're custom for experiments and variations. And we have 15 clients across different A/B testing tools, Monotape, Qubit, so on and so forth. So we just use a piece of code to drag it into FullStory.
Gotcha. Then to everyone in attendance, if you're thinking of a question, please feel free to pop in to ask a question, and we'll get to that right away. Also, just to encourage you to click that get a free month trial if you haven't already and you're not already a FullStory user. Please do that. And we also will, again, make these materials available to attendees in the aftermath of this webinar. And then in the future, we'll also do a write-up on our blog at FullStory to capture the recording and also some follow-up materials to help with that.
Well, Melanie's just put the link. So I don't know if that's the, thank you, Melanie. I don't know if that's the best way to share it. It's literally just a Google Drive doc. So don't delete it, because I think you've all got edit access. Don't delete it for anybody to, no, so nobody else can use it. Just copy and paste it. There are some scripts and formulas in there, but you'll be able to see them. But hopefully that helps. I think the main recommendation here is literally to just code and tag and attribute the is looking for pipe fitting. Thank you. To code and attribute those observations. Feel free to have a play though. Might not work with like 10 of you at once, but there we go.
David, I have to say that for me personally, the big takeaway I've seen from observing how you do this is that it really brings some rigor and methodology to a process that can just generally can feel a little overwhelming because there's so much information, and to sit back and say, well, how do I tackle this in a way that will yield results that I can take action on? It's a challenge, and very much seeing what you've done here is very helpful to me personally, and I think probably a lot of other people as well. We have a question from Jay. He's asking how many people go through these videos and how big is your team?
I'm going to say we all go through the videos. It's probably not strictly accurate. I do encourage everybody to go through the videos. We have a research team of 5. Our total team size is 18 at the moment, growing to 21. Our research team is 5. All 5 team members of the research team go through these screen recordings. We go through them, I would probably say at least once a day, because we have so many different clients. And they vary in size and task, dependent on the objective. FullStory gets a lot of bandwidth from this.
Any other questions? Well, we are rapidly approaching the end of the hour, and David, I wanted to just say thank you from all of us here at FullStory. We really appreciate your enthusiasm for our product, but also just sharing with us such a useful way and a great tool to allow us to really dive in and get actionable insights out of session replay, and hopefully make some improvements to websites and raise conversions. So thank you very much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of our attendees. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm sure David would be happy to receive them with he shared his email earlier. And there it is at davidm@userconversion.com. Or if you want to tweet to FullStory at FullStory, we can keep an eye out for those as well. If you found this useful, please let us know, because we would love to get feedback on this kind of content and whether or not we should keep doing this for you. So hit us with some feedback, either through email. You can email thefuture@fullstory.com. That's thefuture@fullstory.com. Or drop a comment on our blog or tweet to us. We will check all those channels. Thanks again for doing this. And David, cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.